Live, 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 and we are live, guys. Look, we got Darshan Kulkarni. Darshan is a beast. All right, his favorite comic book character, I think, is Wolverine. Right? Is that correct?
No.
No.
Superman by without a doubt, Superman.
Okay.
OG.
Why?
Why? That's really not even a fair question. Come on. Now you know what I
It's
would
he's
argue that there's some negotiation on other fronts. Superman is by far the coolest comic book character. I mean, he was the OG. Everyone is referencing him. Everyone else is sort of wants to be him. I'm kind of 100% down with Superman.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I just saw like all somewhere I saw your Wolverine drawings. I think it was on Instagram or
Oh,
something.
yeah, I've done Wolverine drawings. If I draw for shits and giggles, but
You're actually a good drawer. Um,
thank you.
So Darshan's on not to talk about art. Well, maybe actually this might be similar to art. So
I collect art.
DCT guidance,
Okay.
somebody drafted that stuff, and Darshan's quick to point out, well, actually, anyone can do it. And yes, this is true, Darshan. I believe, and I'm uneducated on this, so this is one of the reasons I'm having you on. But there's a difference between who's able to do something and then something that actually gets done and the
Okay.
initial ideas that get submitted to the FDA.
Okay.
That's what I was saying. Like these things are not just like some wizard drops it into the FDA's desk and says, "Hey, look at this thing. This is our new guidance." And I don't
Let
think that's how it works, right?
let's start from the very basic principles of what does the guidance process look like. Maybe we'll start even before that. Let's talk about the hierarchy of information, because I think that's a key portion of how all this is going to work. So, and I'm sorry to make this a little bit of a law lesson, but I'm just to get the basics
Well, it
out.
would only make sense. You're a lawyer. By the way, this is not legal advice. Darshan is an attorney, but not your attorney. And if he is, this is not the medium to communicate with him, anyways.
Right.
Um, and he's a pharmacist too, but this is not medical advice. We're not even going to get into that. And by the way, shout out to my sponsors, Inato, Creo, Viva, and Versatrial. I see Stephanie from Creo is already on. Stephanie, shout out to the people at all these sponsors. Thank you for making work from home possible for me on certain days. Dan says I'm finally free when you're live and we're talking superheroes. That's how it goes when you get Darshan on. So sorry to interrupt, but this is not legal advice, guys.
Awesome. Thank you. So basically, we all know the number one law of the land is the Constitution. No one's really arguing that. Then you have Congress that makes laws. Great. Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics Act. That's what every one of your clinical trial agreements is talking about. Here's where it gets more complicated. So that comes from the legislative branch. The laws come from the legislative branch. Then you've got the executive branch, which falls directly under the president. And the executive branch basically comes out and says, we will interpret the laws. So that's what the FDA does. They will interpret the laws. They'll take the Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics Act, and they'll say, here's how we define the word adulteration. Here's how we define the word misbranding, blah, 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 blah. They do that in one of two ways. And this is the part I wanted to get to. They do that, number one, by saying something's a regulation or something's a guidance. Now, there are other ways they help interpret that using like enforcement actions and stuff like that. But let's stick to the basics. Whether we're talking about regulations or guidances, the difference, and this is very important because people seem to misunderstand this, regulations are binding on both the FDA and on sponsors and whoever is responsible for them. Guidances are not binding on either one. So the FDA can turn around and say, yeah, I know we wrote this guidance, but it's irrelevant because it's not binding. And your guidances will generally say that right on there. So that's surprising to a lot of people. And then what we take into account is there is something called a draft guidance versus final guidance. And people get really caught up in this idea of draft guidance versus final guidance. And the reason I think it's irrelevant is because from a practical purpose, from a practical viewpoint, it's non-binding. Why does it matter whether it's draft or not? So the DCT guidance came out and everyone sort of was worried. Well, what does this mean? This is the FDA saying, here's what we're going to do. Here's the FDA putting out a position paper. That's basically what a draft guidance is. Here's what we're thinking. The way the FDA generally works, and this comes across in most things, and there's a Supreme Court decision from a while ago, and the Supreme Court basically said a really good place to start is the Janet Jackson nipple slip case. No one thought we'd talk about that right now, but the Janet Jackson nipple slip case. For those people who are too young and don't know what this was, her nipple showed during the Super Bowl, and the FCC sued Fox and said, "Oh, you know what? We are going to punish you for this." And Fox said, "You didn't tell us what not to do." And the Supreme Court said, if you, the government, don't tell someone what not to do, they're allowed to do it. You have to tell them what not to do. So when people say we want more regulations, I go, do you really want more regulations? Because technically you can get away with things until they tell you what not to do.
Right.
So why does all of this matter? This all matters because...
But who wants more regulations? I usually hear the opposite.
Oh, so I will routinely, for example, if you're talking in the advertising space, right? You'll have a lot of people say, you know what, we need, and I'll jump into more things. So advertising space, we want to do more social media. We want more guidances from the FDA telling us what they consider appropriate in social media. You're talking about decentralized studies, and you're saying, oh, I want to have more details to do X, Y, Z. If the FDA hasn't opined on it, you're allowed to do X, Y, Z.
You're allowed to do it currently as long as it's under the scope of GCP, right? Like as long as you're following GCP,
all the other rules still apply.
Yeah.
So
I guess
So the reason I raise all of this is the FDA, unlike what most people say, for example, the big thing right now is AI, and everyone's saying we want opinions on how the government's going to regulate AI. That's not how the government works. There are a million ways you're going to do AI, and there are a million ways to regulate it. And the government doesn't try to regulate all of those things. What they wait for is the industry to consolidate. And what they'll generally do is wait 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And they'll see how the industry finally starts coalescing and goes, instead of going 1,000 different directions, we're letting the industry coalesce into whatever direction it's going to go. And then we'll regulate that. We'll tell you which way to go with that. So DCTs, we've been doing versions of DCT for years now, telehealth, blah, blah, blah. But it's finally gotten to a point of coalescing. So, and I didn't look it up, but I assume that DCT?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, you think about telehealth, we did
telehealth, e-consent.
Yeah.
E-Pro, which that's our next topic later today, guys. E-Pro, that's all part of this.
Yeah.
I think what people are... Well, so then why was there so much hoopla around this DCT guidance? Like, people are like celebrating it like it's a victory.
For two reasons. Number one, because they used the word DCT, so suddenly it became validated. People were talking about DCT like it was a new term. It was a new term, but the components of it were not new. It sort of reminds me of patient centricity. This idea that exactly. People are talking about patient centricity like it's the greatest new thing that's ever happened. Patient centricity has been worked on for the last 20-something years. It just got more and more guidances around it and became more and more of a thing. But patient centricity should have been something you were working on in the 1970s. Like, why were you not? So to me, this idea that the FDA will generally wait until stuff coalesces, then they'll start passing guidances. So the DCT guidance is a coalescing of all the different information they've gotten so far, putting it together and saying, okay, here's how we're going to look at telehealth in the context of decentralized studies. Here's how we're going to look at e-signatures in the context of decentralized studies. Here's how Part 11 compliance will work in the context of decentralized studies, blah, 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 blah. And that's the point. So when you went out and the reason we're doing this podcast was you were like, we want sites to have an input in this. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we can always have a citizen's petition and say, FDA, we have a concern about this and we want you to address this. The FDA is required by law to actually respond to you. So that's number one. Number two, the reason it's a draft guidance is that the FDA does expect you to respond to them. There are guidances that are passed all the time that have thousands of responses. And the FDA's job is to go through several thousand responses and go, some of these responses make no sense. These responses make sense, but here's what they didn't consider, blah, 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 blah. So if you think sites should have a response, go ahead and respond.
Right.
And that's what you should be doing. And here's the thing. One site responding is probably not going to have the same weight as a collection of sites. For example, you're talking about the SOS conference that you guys are putting on.
So good at this, man. Thank you. SaveOurSites.com. Get your tickets now.
There you go.
SaveOurSites.com. That's my yeah. I understand. So my point, and I think Brad as well, who speaks loudly, and Dr. Fox on this topic. We thank you for explaining like the framework, the regulatory framework of this process, because it does demystify this, and we're gonna get back. We're gonna go back and forth into it, so it's digestible for people.
Yeah.
My concern is there's obviously influencers in the space, like
Mhm.
movers and shakers, that are pushing this
Of course they are.
initial guidance to get looked at by the FDA, right?
So no. So that's not how that works. So
Mm.
again, you might say that influencers may say this is something that's important, and they'll have conversations with people saying, "Hey, we think it's important," and the FDA will announce. So you can actually look at their 5-year plan and their 1-year plan, and they'll announce the guidances they're going to work on. I haven't looked at last year's plan, but I'm sure there's one out there. I'm sure it says what they were going to work on this year.
How do you see
And
this? Just Google
on the FDA website, yeah.
FDA 5-year plan or what?
Yeah, you just I'll do it. Let me see if I can pull it up.
We need to start doing this while you're looking for it. We need to start doing this maybe for Save Our Sites. My whole concern with this stuff is I feel like the VCs and the big money behind these DCT vendors
Uh-huh.
organized well, and this is what sites don't do well. They organized well to get this guidance so that they can raise more money, and probably the initial investors can exit or at least feel more comfortable about their position because now there's new money in there or dumb money because the FDA said, yeah, we acknowledge that you exist and that you're on our radar, basically.
Can
Like
you
we're
see my screen?
thinking about you.
So I just picked one just to show you what that looks like. So they just literally have 5-year plans for
Mhm.
different things altogether. So I just did like FDA 5-year plan. Here's their 5-year financial plan. 5-year financial plan. There's
FDA
tons
5-year
of stuff.
financial plan.
Yeah,
And so you as like an organized group of sites can go in here and say, hey, you know what? We're gonna reply to this guidance.
correct.
Okay.
So let's take regulations.gov.
So the bigger question is why aren't sites doing this if all the other stakeholders
Exactly.
are doing this? Well, why do you think? As someone who deals with all stakeholders in the space, you've seen the differences between the groups. Why do you think sites are not doing it? And do you think sites have more power than they actually think
Sites
they
have a
have?
lot of power. Sites simply don't know that they have the power. Here, let me see if I can pull up this docket right here. And I'm doing this live, so I have no idea what I'm going to find in about 30 seconds.
Regulations.gov/docket.
Yeah, so here are the comments right here.
Wow.
14 people have commented on this.
Comment from Anonymous. Is that you?
No. No. Here.
Considering information, this section also omitted how to minimize participant dropout and optimize participant inclusion. This must be Brad Hightower replying to this. Brad,
But
what are
here,
you doing, man?
this is from MedVector.
Wow. Okay.
This is
Who else commented? Let's see.
Eric Borshad, Oria, Himanshu, Delve, individuals as you're seeing for the most part.
Biofire Diagnostics, Catalent.
Yeah.
Catalent's big time, like
Here's a group that's
logistics.
commented. International
Comment.
Association of Clinical Research Nurses.
Wow. So we can just go in there and comment. But what does that
Yeah.
do? The FDA doesn't look at this stuff.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. And
So
I'll
someone's
show
job
you.
is to look at this and do what?
Someone's job is to reconcile all of it. So let me see if I can pull a guidance that was reconciled.
Why don't they have a LinkedIn? People can comment on their LinkedIn. It's so much easier.
Hold on. So let me see. Finalize.
Stephanie says the comments are really interesting. I have a team member, Kaya, who discovered these. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I want to respond to.
So we can go in there as the SOS. Dr. Fox, I hope you're watching.
Absolutely.
Monica.
But you've got to make sure you actually represent them. So Sunshine Act, final guidance. This
You
was
love the
obviously
Sunshine Act, man. Since I've
I
known you,
picked it
that's what
because
we talk
it's
about.
done. But here's the point I was trying to make.
Federal.
Yeah, I want to get to here. Here's the comment. Many commenters express concerns with blah blah blah. Here's their response. We appreciate this. This is their response. My point is they go through each comment, and this is 72
comment.
pages.
I see. Okay. So point. Okay. Fair enough. This is why you're an attorney. You bombard us with facts until we stop talking. Look, we get into opinion, which is I think a lot more interesting. But I think like thank you for providing the clarity like around the regulatory framework of
Absolutely.
all this stuff because no one knows how this works. I mean, the smart money knows how this works. I'm sure the
Yeah.
big site networks know how this works. The problem is the long tail of the sites, like the ones who I represent. Like I try to be a voice for them because I am one. Uh, they don't really get organized and do this kind of stuff. Like they're not even aware. I wasn't aware that you can do this.
You saw individuals respond.
I
But
know. But the original guidance that
uh-huh.
they released, like it was if you had to guess, okay, how many different organizations collaborated to get the initial one like on the radar of the FDA?
Mhm.
And does it have to be like organized or is it like just whoever wants to do it? And if there's enough, the FDA says, hey, we got to respond because the community wants something.
So the FDA is not always influenced just because you ask for it. Even if every single person asks, doesn't mean that the FDA will respond.
Right.
Like, for example, if like literally the entire industry went, you know what, we want FDA to opine on artificial intelligence and clinical research, I would be shocked if the FDA said, okay, we'll put a guidance out tomorrow. It just wouldn't happen.
So where does the pressure come from change for?
So the FDA has as part of their 5-year plan, as part of their 10-year plan, as part of their funding, there will be pressures put on the FDA saying, here's what we want you to do. So, for example, as part of ARA in 2009, there was a push on the FDA to be patient centric. The funding came from patient centricity. The law required patient centricity. So you'll start seeing a whole bunch of guidances that get into patient centricity. Similarly, if as you start getting into decentralized studies and all of those, there's no law yet that requires the FDA to talk about it. But now, if you can make a pitch going to the FDA using, say, a citizen's petition or the like, and go, look, we are concerned about this issue. This ties into your requirement under XYZ law. We want you to opine on this. And so it's a much broader process. That's not, yes, need plays a voice into it, but how does it play into the larger FDA strategic plan plays a voice into it as well.
So who determines like what's on their 5-year plan, 10-year plan? They do,
They do.
or
They
it's a
do.
combination.
I mean, no, they do. It's always so. The FDA is an independent organization.
Yeah.
It's not a lobbyist organization, so it's
But are they
not like
influenced by
Congress.
anyone, like at Bio
Not
or
really.
DIA
No.
when they go meet people and?
Influence to the extent that we're all individuals who are influenced, but not influenced as in the FDA is being influenced by. Like Congress has lobbyists. There's no such thing as an FDA lobbyist that goes to the FDA and says, we will influence exactly what you do. They're
Mhm.
supposed to be independent. So if you want to influence the FDA, the way that would generally work is you would go to the congressperson who's, say, on the FDA committee and tell the congressperson, we think this is really important. Now that congressperson will then tell the FDA, why is there nothing out here on this issue?
So if you look at the 5-year plan of the FDA,
Mm-hmm.
you can sort of predict the future of where things are gonna
Yeah.
go. So
Yeah.
is this like for VCs or for startup
For everyone.
founders? Like, just read the FDA 5-year plan and work on a
Yeah.
solution for so that in
And
5
1-year
years.
plan. They have 10-year plans, 5-year plans, 1-year plans. I think they have 3-year plans. I
Hmm.
don't look into them too much personally because I don't think 5-year. I think 5 years is too long in our industry. So if
Really? Things have been slow in our industry.
so think DCT.
Yeah.
5 years ago, did that exist?
Yeah, you said it did.
Right,
Telehealth,
right. The
e-consent.
components did, but if
Hmm.
it would the FDA have opined on having a decentralized guidance on their 5-year plan? I would be surprised.
Probably
They would
not.
have
I
the
mean,
components on there.
we still don't know what a DCT actually even means, though.
I
I mean,
agree. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you
I doubt the
100%.
FDA knows what it means. I mean, no one knows what it means. Even tech vendors in this space don't know what it means. They know what it means to them,
Yeah,
and they know
agreed.
what it means to raise money in the next
Yeah,
round and
yeah,
then exit.
yeah.
Sites don't know what it means. That's part of the frustration. And I think sponsors don't jump. They're not quick to jump on this stuff either.
It's the closest buzzword. It was patient centricity a while ago, AI right now, blockchain the year before. It's just everyone
Blockchain,
jumps.
remember? Crypto's back, by the way. But anyways, blockchain for research. We haven't heard anything about this anymore. Like, remember
Yeah.
5 years ago, blockchain for healthcare is going to transform the way
Yep.
we share records, and
Yep.
now you
And I
got
think it'll still
sponsors.
happen. I
But I don't know through blockchain. Like one of my sponsors, Creo, they just released a tool that most of the EMRs in this country are like connected, right? There's like I
yeah,
don't know 5 players or something. You know
yeah,
better than me.
yeah.
So they can get once the patient signs their authorization to release record, like Creo will automatically put that patient's records in your source for you from
Mhm.
anywhere. It could be from another practice. They'll find the
Yeah,
record, they'll
yeah.
put it. I don't think that's blockchain, right? I just think that's
No,
like
that's not
AI or
necessarily
something.
blockchain.
Yeah.
So the way blockchain, so there are two different rules here. Blockchain goes to record keeping and the anonymization of it and the security of it, blah blah blah. Um, on the other hand, crypto. Sorry. On the other hand, this idea of um, sharing data, it really goes to interoperability, which is how do you get
Hmm.
different systems to connect to each other. And there were
Hmm.
laws passed, I want to say 2019, that required interoperability because these different data systems otherwise just existed
Right.
and no one could transfer their data back and forth.
Play nice with others is what's the
Exactly.
term. Yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So that's the whole point. So interoperability is a factor in blockchain in health, but it's not the only factor, if you will.
Yeah. So, but the blockchain. So, point is like you've got these because I remember reading 5 years ago. This was before
Yeah.
COVID, right? COVID
Yeah.
just like catalyzed this.
Yeah.
5 years ago, you heard like there was a study, I think by Tufts or Center Watch. They might be the same organization for all I know. They said within 5 years, they said within by 2025, the majority of spending in this industry will be on tech vendors, not on sites, not on CROs, but on
Yeah.
tech vendors. They
Yeah.
said that. I didn't say
I,
it. They
no,
said it.
I'm sure they said that, but I feel like
But
I
we're
feel like
already
some of
there.
that's hyperbole.
We're there already.
You think?
I'm going live with Robert at 1 p.m. today.
Yeah.
He controls budgets of a small biotech, and he's a large, small. The majority of R&D spending goes into these tech vendors, tech platforms, not the site-centric ones, like not like Creo. Those Creo and stuff, sites have to pay for. What
Yeah.
the sponsors pay for, all right, like IRTs, EDC,
Yeah.
all this management tools like how to get the IP dispensed to the right patient, how to do diaries for these guys, the wearables, all that stuff, EEGs, ECG, all that stuff, central readers, that's what they're talking about. We're already there. We're already
So
there. So the
it's
tech vendors are the ones making the most money in our space in 2023 going forward. We didn't need to wait till 25.
it reminds me of the story of Microsoft, where everyone thought that the money was going to be in the hardware, and Bill Gates bet it was going to be the software, and he was right.
It was right.
So
Yeah.
so it's the money's in the software. I'm surprised, honestly. I didn't think the numbers were that high, but good
Yeah.
to know.
Yeah.
It's an industry. The industry is interesting, and I think the part that, again, we're talking about DCTs, but we can talk about other stuff as well. A really big one right now is real world evidence,
Uh-huh.
and the idea is that FDA is coming out and basically saying we want not just these pristine double-blinded placebo-controlled studies, which are great, but they don't tell me how the actual patient use is. So
Right.
DCTs will help with that process. And I think that's where the tech vendors are coming in. They're saying we'll give
Supposedly.
you, yeah, we'll give you real
Supposedly
data.
DCT. I mean, you posted an article today, actually. I saw it when I was outside preparing for this interview. There's too many clinical trials. Why are there too, you posted an article, right? That was
Yeah,
today. Well, this is
right.
going to add to more. Like,
Well, the
This
issue
is
there was in the article, it was fraudulent clinical trials. So they weren't actually clinical trials, was the problem. They were just people lying. So I'd never thought of the opposite side of that equation, which was we all talk about we just don't have enough information. What if the information we have is wrong or it's bad? And that's
right.
the question they were answering.
Right, but RWE, real world evidence, I mean, and then retrospective chart reviews.
Yeah.
There there was a vendor at 2019 DIA that I
Mhm.
forgot the name. Even if I wanted to remember, I forgot. They're probably bankrupt. They went to doctor and they were backed by a big CRO.
Yeah.
But the CRO is not advertising front and center, but they were on the back of the brochure like a little tiny logo.
Yeah.
So that got me thinking, okay, why are they investing in this? It's AI.
Hmm.
They had salespeople go to doctors' offices across the country and say, hey, do you want to do clinical trials with us?
Hmm.
The doctor said, okay, interesting. Yeah. What do I have to do? Well, we're going to give you like 5 grand and we're going to put this software on your EMRs and then we're just connected and we're doing like retrospective
Yeah.
chart reviews.
Yeah.
That was the in perpetuity. They didn't have an end
Yeah.
date.
Yeah.
And occasionally we'll better know which studies you're more suitable for in the future for like
Yeah.
real trials. But really, that was
So
the carrot on the stick.
so I actually I had to review those agreements for clients.
Ah, you know very well what I'm talking about. Some
Yeah.
AI nonsense back in 2019.
Well, first of all, it was never a really AI. The,
The buzzword
it,
was AI.
exactly. People have been talking about AI for like since 2015. You and I, but I'm pretty sure you and I have podcasts about AI from like
Oh yeah,
2015.
yeah, man. You and I
Um,
were early.
but the point I'm making though is in those situations we were struggling a little bit with this idea that we have to trust this information, and we're coming to realize that there's just a lot of hype, and the FDA is starting to call them out, and real world evidence is going to be amazing, but can we actually see the information? Can we see the forest for the trees? Because there's a lot of noise in real world evidence that people
Yeah,
haven't yet figured out how to clean out. So we'll see.
but what's the value in RWE? I mean, that to me, the value is just how to design the real trials better.
See, no, I disagree with you. I think the value is in. So, for example, um, let's say we take a medication, and I can talk about drugs like this because I had nothing to do with them. Let's take a Fosamax, which was used for osteoporosis for women. This is like the 2000s, if you will.
Hmm.
And what you notice is that Fosamax is supposed to be taken at 6 in the morning, and it's supposed to take it on an empty stomach. And that's this pristine condition under which everyone, like all these women, were supposed to take it. Here's the problem: if in reality all of them take it at 9 p.m., whatever you like, all the evidence you've got backed up doesn't support the real world like approvals. So the FDA may need to go back and reassess the studies at that point. Similarly, you've got a lot of approvals out there now that are based on this idea that you'll continue to do additional studies and you'll get more information. And when you get into real world evidence, that information is going to be based not on these pristine studies, but on live patient data. So I
Right.
think we're getting into this new era of, um, I'm going to call it risk sharing. This
Mm.
idea that FDA will take a greater risk approving a drug with the ability to potentially pull it down, pull out the drug later on if the risk profile changes as they get more information. And I think real world evidence is a critical part of that process.
I see. But for post marketing
Yeah,
or concurrently with the phase 3, what do you think is best?
I think it'll probably land up being primarily post marketing, but I think because I think it'll be post marketing and or new indications for the most part. But I think that there is a role for it in pre approval as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of this messiness that you've alluded to with the real world, like, in the trials, they documented, hey, they took it at 6 a.m.,
Yeah,
even if they didn't,
right,
because the
right,
patient
exactly,
is not going to put themselves out there when they go see their doctor. They're going to
correct.
say, oh, yeah, I took it
Yeah,
at 6.
that
In
was perfect.
reality, they took it like at 3, right?
Correct.
So once you get data, like e-diaries, that's our next live stream today, guys, 1 p.m. Pacific. E-diaries, you're going to see, that's almost a perfect segue into that live stream. E-diaries are starting to cause real problems in these studies. I don't think sites sponsor CROs, CRAs. I don't think anyone in our space understands the impact of what more data actually means. Like, it
Yeah.
means it's a mess.
I
What
don't
your
think we've
real world
seen data.
evidence,
Mhm.
we're starting to see it in studies, man. It's a nightmare for some people.
Yeah.
Myself, like on a very, very small scale, we're cleaning up some messes.
Yeah.
Others on a much bigger scale might go out of business. It's that serious. And it is real world evidence without it being called that way,
Yeah.
being introduced into a phase 3 trial, which is supposed to be pristine and
Yeah.
clean. But the
Yeah.
more data you put into it, the harder it is to be clean because life is messy and
Right.
people are messy. Clinical trials are designed in a way to be pristine, like you said, but they're not.
Right.
So
What?
they're
So
going to
here's a
cause a
really
lot of
good question.
problems.
Here's a really simple question. What happens if you are, say, designing this Fosamax study, right? Because it's the easy one to pick on right now. You design this Fosamax study. Suppose women, older women, are supposed to be taking this at 6 a.m. You now look at the data midway through the study, and your data says they're all taking it at 3 p.m. Do you stop the study? Do you redesign the study? Does it have to be an adaptive study? Do you have to have necessarily created an adaptive arm if this happens?
If it's a phase 3 or if it's a real world evidence.
Well, by definition, could you do any more phase threes that don't have adaptive arms if you're going to have like patient diaries that
You,
are actual live information?
I mean, yeah, imagine being a CRA on that study in the middle of database lock.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's happening. Maybe not to that like extent,
Yeah.
but there's examples like this I'm dealing with right now at
Yeah.
my small site in
I have
Yuma. Like this is happening.
I have a friend right now who owns one of those companies that you can open up the bottle and it'll tell you when the bottle was opened, and so you can tell when the tablet was actually taken. So your e-patient diary will self-populate. So you can't say I took it today. It'll tell you when you took it.
Yeah, but the
So that
patient can say, and the site can say, well, we documented that, but the patient inadvertently opened the bottle, but then they remember they weren't supposed to take it, so they closed it again.
sure. So they closed it again. Did they open it up again the rest of the day? Because I can
I
see
don't
that
know,
too.
yes or no, but how do you, like, even without that second part, that first part's still at least a query, if
It
not a
is.
protocol deviation. And if it
It is.
happens 1,000 times in your study, you're
Yeah.
screwed.
Exactly right. And now suddenly sponsors will come to sites and say, we need you to do a better job. And the sites go, no, no, no. You guys don't even know how to fix this problem on your end if it's post marketing.
Yeah,
Why do you think
you
I can
guys
fix it pre
designed,
marketing?
the sites will say, you guys approved that stupid vendor that we
Right.
told you e-diaries don't work. We told you paper diaries are preferred. Ask 100 sites out there. 100 out of 100 will tell you. There's going to be one saying, actually, Dan, it's we like no, you don't. Look, 100 of you guys will prefer paper diaries for your patients, right?
I think paper diaries are easier to cheat on. That's why people prefer it. And that's why
But
the
patients
FDA,
do. Patients do.
of course, patients do. It's
Yeah.
so much easier to say that I took it on time.
If you were a patient, what would you prefer? A bottle that opens and monitors you when you
Honestly, a
swallow it?
bottle that opens. Honestly,
Oh,
100% a bottle that
Sean.
opens. 100% because I
What
know I will
about
not
a
write things
pill with
down.
the RFID that knows when you swallow it?
So I don't like being tracked. So there's a part of me that doesn't like being tracked. So from a pure privacy standpoint, I'm 100% with you, which is I don't like being tracked. But from a
Hmm.
pure data needs to be tracked. So I'll give you an example. I actually have a Trello board. I don't know if your people know what a Trello board is, but essentially it's to track um, projects you have to do. I genuinely don't know when I take my tablet, so I put in my Trello board, take your medication. I can't tell you the number of times I forget to put on there I took my medication.
Mm-hmm.
And my point is that's my best case scenario because I'm next to that Trello board literally constantly. So if something can track that for me, it's one less thing I have to do.
Right. Yeah. But if you get kicked out of a study because you opened it at the wrong time too many times, and you
Mm-hmm.
no longer get your IP,
Mm-hmm.
like you'll be pissed. You would have rather had
You'd
that
be,
paper diary.
but that's exactly, see, that's the point. So you're saying it's easier to fraudulently, well, maybe not the word
I didn't
fraudulently, but
say that. You're an attorney, man. You got to be careful with your words.
it's easier. You're right, which is why I pulled that back mid sentence. It's easier for patients to zhuzh up, shall we
I
say,
like that because I don't understand
inadvertently, right? Inadvertently make it easier to use, and
inadvertently
but
open the bottle, like
there you go.
LinkedIn user
Inadvertently
says.
open the bottle. Yeah,
I'm sure this is already being used in studies, and somebody's already used this response from a site.
yeah, yeah.
Is this being used? The bottle opening stuff?
So they've done some studies with it
Yeah, see,
already.
it's already being used. And people are
Yeah.
saying it's a protocol deviation. I know. And what do you do when it's like a thousand deviations, and you have to submit to the FDA like in a year? I mean, those CRAs, can you imagine? They're already overworked. Like what do you actually do? So there's comes a point where this tech is like counterproductive. And we saw it, I think, with care access. Like when the wheels fell off the bus, right? I mean, okay, Pfizer said, yeah, let's do half of our data come from one place. Perfect. Great idea. There must have been some board of directors like intermingling with each other, but I don't know how that deal comes off. When the drug company are so risk averse, how do you think, like, were you involved at all in this? Or you can comment.
I don't know what you're talking about specifically, so finish the sentence
So
for me.
Pfizer's Lyme disease study with care access.
Okay, that was a while ago. I can't even remember the facts of the case right now.
Uh, Yeah, I don't know the facts either. They screwed up the data, and 50% of the data couldn't be used because it came from
It
Care
was a
Access.
site thing, wasn't it? It was like I remember
The
like
wheels on the
very,
bus fell off. Care
yeah,
Access's idea was, hey, we're gonna go in like remote areas with Lyme disease, like
yeah,
in the
uh-huh,
Northeast, like forests.
sure.
We're gonna have clinicians on a bus go
Oh,
out
I
there
missed
and
that part. Okay. Uh-huh.
yeah, that was like a huge part. But we're gonna use tech to like tie it all together.
Okay.
And the data, it's very related to what we're talking about now. The data just got very messy,
Yeah.
and Pfizer couldn't use, and there was like a
Yeah.
lawsuit going on, and
Yeah.
CareAccess CEO, they laid off like half of their workforce, and he
Right.
came out not even taking blame. He said, "No, Pfizer designed the study; they approved it." So they were like pointing back to them, and
Right.
Pfizer saying, "Well, you guys screwed it up." Why would Pfizer, if they're so risk averse, just your opinion,
Yeah.
go with this risky idea? Like what?
I'll be honest, I think Pfizer actually is not as risk averse as you think. So there are things everyone is risk averse to, things like you don't want to upset the government. But in terms of taking guesses and trying things out, sponsors are actually less risk averse than you would think. And I'll give you an example of that. We were talking about what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, I forget the type of, so Craig Lipset, as we both know,
Love that
he
dude.
yeah, exactly. But Craig made his big thing, like he became very, very prominent because it wasn't DCTs. What is it that he became really, really prominent on?
Anything disruptive, he's all for. Craig is
Right, I
like,
recognize that. But initially, he was working, I want to say, with Pfizer,
yeah, yeah. He
and
was a clin. I interviewed him back in 2010, man. Head of clinical innovations at Pfizer. He was like director.
right, and he did one of the big studies that were disruptive in some way. I forget what the specific
Yeah,
fact
overactive
was.
bladder for male and female. Like it was an
Right,
easy study to do online and
right,
stuff.
and that's how he made his bones, if you will. And my point
Yeah.
being, companies do tend to be more innovative. What they
All
do
right.
not want to do is they do not want to upset the government, because you're talking about jail time, you're talking about compliance issues. You and I have
Okay.
battled multiple times on the question of fair market value, for example. But I'm opening up that
Don't get
Pandora's
me
box.
started, man. Brad and them,
Exactly.
they're more passionate about that than I.
But my point being, when it comes to innovative models, sponsors try it all the time. So to me, them trying this out, I would be surprised if more companies don't go out and start saying we want to do more decentralized studies. More companies don't come out and say we want to do patient engagement in
But
these
with the
different ways.
same idea of like the bus, or that is that done? Like that
I
model?
think no, I don't think that model's done. I think they'll learn from it. They'll improve it.
Mm.
And maybe they say maybe we don't do a bus.
Maybe
Maybe we
they'll learn
have
for the
15 of them.
100th time.
Right. It's all about iterations and improvements.
Okay. All right.
That's
Well,
my take.
and then
Yeah.
Walgreens to some extent. I don't know which one's out of it. CVS, the one that pulled the plug on the.
CVS pull their own plug. Yeah.
Yeah. Walgreens, not yet. They're still doing it.
They're saying they're investing more. I don't
No,
fully understand that model, so I'm excited to see what they
I don't
come up
either.
with. I think you and I have discussed this off camera. I'm fascinated by it because I spent a large amount of time, probably about 15 years in retail pharmacy, and I know what kind of information I had as a retail pharmacist. And
Yeah.
as much as I want to say that retail pharmacy is a great place to do clinical trials, I think there's some huge advantages to retail pharmacies. Things like it's more accessible and it is more available and all those good things. One of the biggest issues is you need to have access to inclusion exclusion criteria. So you can't really narrow down. Like when I was looking at my patient charts at that time, you don't get an ICD-9 code. So what are you basing how are you pitching your studies? How do you decide
Just off the med
whether,
history, right? The drug
but you
history.
don't have a med history.
Right, the con meds. You have a list of
So,
all their meds, no?
well, first of all, you don't have a full list of all their meds because you have a list of all the meds they've taken from your pharmacy.
From your pharmacy, yeah.
So
You
you get
assume
patient
it's
hopping all the
all
time.
their meds, but they may
So
not
we
be.
don't. Most pharmacists don't assume it's all
Oh,
their
you don't
meds.
assume that.
You
Okay.
can't, because they could be taking a combination of mail order, combination of
CVS, like all the good med
CVS.
seekers, they know how to
Exactly.
go to different pharmacies and get.
Right.
Yeah, but
So
like in the
it's a good
context of
starting
a
point.
clinical trial, that's a perfect example of messy. In the context of a clinical trial, is it better to just use the patient's primary care or specialist as the source for records rather than a retail pharmacy because of that issue?
And I think that's sort of where the decentralized guidance comes in, right? And they're talking a little bit about using those tools a little bit more without inundating your primary care provider with becoming API. Though I would argue that the guidance itself is interestingly enough saying, what's the word I'm looking for? The guidance comes out and says that it's not for complicated studies. It's intended for simplified studies. I think it might eventually evolve, but right now, that's how the guidance is written. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, that part is clear. And even with the simple studies, it's falling apart. And I think that's where it loses. I think that's where this whole DCT on steroids, which is really like translation for let's get further away from the clinician, from the patient's clinician as we can, or from the investigator as we can. Ideally, the best PI is the clinician of the patient. Like there is no separation
Sure.
between
Yeah, I agree
the
with that
two.
statement.
So the more you try to separate, like create distance between the treating provider and the research team, I think the more of these issues get
I
thrown
agree with
into
that
the
statement.
mix.
Yeah. But the question is, and I think this is what Walgreens and a lot of the larger pharmacies were trying to answer, which is there are two holders of information. There are multiple holders of information. One holder is your doctor, your PCP, if you will. The second holder is the pharmacy. There's also a third holder that no one talks about, which is the insurance company.
Yeah. Why don't they can do clinical? They can do the best clinical trial of all, and they could rename it something else.
And I'm sure there will be another version. You heard it here first. There will be another version in probably 5 years where insurance companies are starting to do clinical
Blue Shield
trials.
gets into clinical trials. Blue Shield
Right.
clinical research.
I mean, they're
That's a
technically
huge
doing that
problem
already,
there.
right?
Yeah, but so that's another point. This is where I think this stuff falls off as well. We talked about the separation between the patient's actual provider and the research team. There's also a level of trust that the patients have that's not scalable. I don't think you can scale trust. And so I think the antidote for like more diversity in our studies and faster accrual, better retention is actually to do the hard work of training more clinicians to do research and incorporate telehealth. Like I understand there's people that live in remote areas. Well,
Yeah.
telehealth's fine. I mean, you
Hmm.
and I are doing this remotely.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fine. You can send traveling nurses and all that, but the more you start like removing the interactions between the treating clinicians and their immediate team that they can directly supervise versus a team that some VC backed tech vendor supervises, where the wheels literally fall off the bus, that's where the mess becomes. And that's where I think myself, Brad, a lot of people who are like voicing our opinions about this are like shouting like, we need to invest in our existing infrastructure rather than pushing these new things, because there's a lot of issues even at the experienced sites. Like get them, make their lives easier, and then get new clinicians to start doing research. To me,
There's
that's the solution, but it's hard, and no one, it's not sexy, it's not scalable. There's no VC money there, at least not
I'm,
yet.
I'm going to disagree with you on a number of points there. Number one, I think there's a great comment there, which is not all clinicians want to participate in clinical trials. Many are already overwhelmed.
I agree.
And I,
I agree.
and I think that's the point. I think last time I checked, and this is several years ago, they said something only 3% of physicians participate in clinical trials.
Right. So if we
And
just
that,
double that, 3 to 6, that's huge.
yeah, but can you
Huge.
imagine getting 6% of physicians to do it? Like I think it's something like a 98% turnover every year
Hmm.
is what I'd heard. So it's not
Yeah.
the same 3%. The To me, I know you keep using VC backed funding as a bad thing, and I don't think it's a bad thing.
I don't think
I,
it's bad. I just think there's negative aspects to it,
such as what?
such as things not working out, patients having bad experiences in studies, never doing again. Imagine all those PIs that worked with Care Access.
Sure.
That's going to contribute to the turnover. Now, if someone like me approaches them and say, hey, like 5 years from now, hey, let's open a clinic. Like, doctor, you have a really good opportunity here. No, no, I've done that. That's a bunch of headaches. No, 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 thanks. And they
But you
move
were the
on.
same person who said a second ago we should be embracing innovation.
We should be embracing innovation at the
But if
site
that,
level. At
but
the
that
site, we need to make life
so
easier for the current existing sites.
well, why not look at different ways to actually engage more healthcare providers? So maybe the pie doesn't have to be just the current PI. Maybe the PI's definition changes. For example, that's what Walgreens is trying to do, right? Maybe the future was, and I don't know if that's the Walgreens model, to be fair, or CVS's
Yeah, who
model,
knows?
but
We're not
um,
sponsored by either of them, so it's
right.
okay.
Neither is my podcast, but
And never will be after this.
possibly not.
Yeah,
No, and I have respect for trying. I have respect. I just don't know what their model is. They've been
sure.
at it for several years at this point. You would think you'd at least get a sense of what is it. The pharmacist is the PI, or the NP who comes to the location is the PI. I don't know.
But we're not, yeah, but we're not addressing like the trust, like the patient
So
trust.
you said that, right?
Hmm.
You said there's a trust, there's non-scalability of trust.
Yes.
I'm going to disagree with you on that as well. For example, there are two different levels of addressing non-scalability of trust. One is there is an maybe it's not scalable, but there's an aura of trust. And what I mean by that is if I come to see my doctor, I trust his nurses will treat me the same way and that they'll
Hmm.
treat me right. So there's an aura of trust that I automatically give to my nurses and give to
Right.
anyone else taking
That's
care of me.
branding. That's branding.
Okay, so if you agree that there's branding, then why does it matter if the branding is to 5 people or 50 people or 500 people?
If it's under the same roof and it's a well-run organization, it should be the same.
So then, if that's true, then why does it matter if it's VC funded or not? As
Because
long as you have that
we're
trust.
going from 500. So the private, my investigator, I'll come back to like the PI
Sure,
work with. He's got Yuma, Arizona's like probably the largest private practice that's not hospital based
sure.
in the town. He's probably
Uh-huh.
got 3,000 patients in the database and nine
Okay.
providers working at
Uh-huh.
2 locations.
Okay.
I don't think he can go from 3,000 to 30,000 without losing that quality of service, right?
Um,
So, And that,
Wait, hold on, stop there, because
yeah,
I know physician practices that are 10,000 people deep.
they would have to make a lot of changes internally to accommodate the growth, right?
Okay,
But
so we're not saying it's
that's
not
from a
possible.
private practice. That's from
Okay,
private practice. But it, like, when you
okay,
talk about research,
sure.
okay, if you want him to now manage studies and oversee patients at
Hmm.
3 locations instead of 2, you've got to improve the infrastructure. You've got to have more clinicians actually go out there representing
Sure,
his same
sure.
standards and all that stuff,
So
right?
what you're talking is a franchise model.
Franchise model, sure, sure. But the way a lot of the VCs are going after this is, let's let's scale it before we nail it. Like, let's just do it because, like, we got the guide and we got the green light. Let's do it, and then we'll figure it out later. Well, the problem is, because they need the results now so that the new wave of investors get excited, come in, and then the old ones can exit, right?
Mhm. So So number one, I think that that's not just a VC problem. That's any company that's trying to grow problem, including small sites.
Yeah, yeah,
They want to become larger sites. I think the second part of it is that I will agree with this problem overall, and I think you'll catch me saying this in multiple places, which is in general the big. I'm a huge fan of tech, but I think one of the big problems with tech overall, in fact, hell, I'm bringing tech to the. I have a solution that I've talked to you about before,
oh
but
yeah, that's right.
we'll talk about that later on.
Okay,
But the the idea is that a lot of these tech companies come with the mindset of fail fast, which is
right,
make your mistakes and
right.
move on, fix those mistakes, and it's an iterative process, which makes sense from a tech perspective, but it makes less sense um, from a healthcare perspective
From a
because
patient
these
dealing with
correct
patient with a human
exactly
being's health on the line
exactly right.
perspective. Yeah,
So and companies are learning, but that learning is difficult because I think the a lot of companies have made a lot of money in technology and they see the big pot of money being either fintech or health tech, and they go into both of these things thinking that they can make the same returns as quickly in health tech and fintech. I can't speak to fintech, but in
right.
the context of health tech, there are reasons those rules exist, and
Mhm.
breaking the rules have much more significant penalties than in doing so in technology. Like, for example, Uber and Airbnb, they all really did really well because they said, we're willing to face the consequences of having an illegal taxi operation. And
Right. We'll just pay it. I mean, it's faster for us to,
exactly. We
yeah.
pay
And
the
in
fines.
healthcare, you can't really do that because you're messing with
Exactly.
health outcomes of people, which
Yeah.
is pretty damn important. I mean, if we learned anything from Theranos, we could learn that. That was
Speaking of
another
UPVC getting
another
out.
scale it and then nail it, right? And she
Yeah.
definitely got nailed.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe we could have her on the podcast then another time.
You can have a Martin Shkreli and Elizabeth Holmes
Oh
podcast.
man, that would. You want to join me on that one if we can pull it off?
100%. If you get them, I'm in.
So that's my whole point. The further you remove the patient is removed from the treating clinician, the more trust you lose. So it's become you need to spend more to get the same number of patients in. At my site, when I call a patient from my PI's private practice and say, "Hey, I'm calling from Dr. Smith's office. I have a study."
Mhm.
It's anecdotal. There's way higher success rate of them showing up than if I call to someone from an ad who
Right.
responded to an ad. Like, they're skeptical right off the bat.
Right.
So I think the industry is like trying to throw money at this other option instead of focusing on what's already working and just improving and making life easier for these sites to encourage more sites to come in, because that's a 10-year plan right there. Like, you get more community research based, research naive clinicians doing research that are actually treating patients and make them successful. Don't make them run out of business and then drive your bus to another community and do the
So
same thing.
what you're calling what you're describing is called carpet bagging, by the way. But
Really? I gotta look that
yeah,
up.
yeah.
Let's look this up.
But carpetbagging basically was from this old timey thing, which is you'd have these salespeople who'd go hawk their wares in different places, and it's like Cobra oil will solve blah blah blah.
Ah,
Uh, and what
yes.
would happen is that no one, obviously the Cobra oil didn't work, but by that time they'd have already moved on to the next town, and you can't do anything about it. So that's called carpetbagging.
I like that. That's exact. I think a meme is gonna be appropriate for that one. Yes.
Um, the other part of it, I think, is I think you're right, which is I think we do need to, as an industry, keep focusing on the interest of improving things. But there are two responses to that. So number one, from a VC perspective, it makes very little sense for them. I remember we spoke a little bit earlier when we started. We talked about regulations, and we said that if they say you can't do something, um, if they don't say you can't do something, you can probably get away with it. That's how the Supreme Court's usually
Yeah.
interpreted, not generally speaking. The point being, if a tech company decides that they want to spend a whole bunch of money to come to you, to come to a site that already exists, they know that there are already rules in place. They know what those rules are. Playing in that space is problematic because the rules are clear. You're going to have people saying this is not allowed to be done. It's easier to go into what are called green fields that have not been explored, and say, we're going to do this here because the rules are not clear. And therefore, we're not bound by the same rules in the same way. So we can make it, we can do innovation, we can actually change things. And and do it in a way that there's a lot more money to be made. And that's where I think a lot of the ideas around Walgreens and stuff came about, which is the rules around how pharmacists would, and I'm not picking on Walgreens because I genuinely don't know.
I know it's just funny.
But that's why it makes sense, right? Because the rules are not clear there, so
Right.
there are opportunities there.
Well,
So
you have more time to get to some of these questions, or you got to go?
we can try some, sure.
Try this one. I'll be right back. Okay, this is for you.
Hold on before you do that, because do you know the progress of ERISA's regulations in improving transparency of TPAs? I don't know what a TPA is.
Yeah, what is
like
a TPA, Calvin?
Oh, third-party payers. I'm gonna guess third-party payers like PBMs. But no, I'm not. I haven't followed ERISA regulations in general, anyways.
There's so many comments. We need to have you on like more. This one's gonna cover both of us.
I'd love PBMs. Actually, I think I know. Go back to it for a second. So he's talking about gag clauses and the like. So there's a whole thing. So gag clauses, for the most part, right now, FTC is looking at PBMs as we speak. And in the context of looking at PBMs, the FTC I think I want to say yes. Oh, third-party administrator. Thank you, Kelvin. Right now, the FTC literally yesterday withdrew some of the safe harbors that they had put out for PBMs. And they came out and said that we are re-reviewing everything. We have concerns. So gag clauses are going to become problematic. I had someone reach out to me. I had a reporter reach out to me about gag clauses, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. Those are, we couldn't really identify the gag clauses in the same way. What were deemed to be gag clauses when we were looking at them turned out not to really be gag clauses. So I think it's going to, the role of PBMs is going to change, and they're going to get more rules. How is that going to play into clinical trials? It's going to be a complicated mess, because PBMs don't really engage in the same way, because they're not really involved in clinical trials. It's usually the healthcare company, third-party payer, which might be a Blue Cross or the like. It's not your PBM that gets into it. We can have a whole discussion about that. I am not a reimbursement specialist again. Please identify yourself again. Is that me?
Identify yourself, sir. Where is your papers? Darshan.
My name is Darshan Kulkarni. I'm an attorney. I'm a pharmacist. I've never been asked that before.
Show us your papers.
Give me your papers.
Yeah.
Show us your papers. But no, my name is Darshan Kulkarni. I'm an attorney based out of the Philadelphia area. And yeah, so I work with life sciences companies and their service providers. So I work with sponsors, sites, CROs, but also food companies, and work with insurers as well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Darshan, every time you come on, we get like so many questions, and apparently you're gonna have new followers. Darshan's link is gonna be underneath this video, or if you're listening on the podcast, in the show notes, his LinkedIn is like always popping off. He hasn't done memes yet. Do you feel like you're gonna start doing memes at one point, or as an
I
attorney, that's not
did
okay?
memes. I did memes, and my experience was I didn't get the returns on the ROI. There was no clear ROI for me. You're just more popular.
No, it's because I'm not an attorney. I don't have a license to lose. I'm not worried about it. Uh,
Al's asking a question.
Yeah,
Increasing
Al
surveillance
Pacino, man.
inspection. I
He's been
know.
on the show too. We gotta have you on again, Al. But Food and Drug Omnibus Reform Act of 2022, increasing surveillance inspection requirements in any manner short of a physical inspection, including virtual inspections. Yeah, that's
So
fine. That's fine.
no, I mean they're doing it all the time. I mean, I have several clients who are in the middle of surveillance inspections. I actually have clients who are having the FDA come into their house and doing inspections multiple
To the
times
house for what?
to do inspections, to
Why
do
in their
clinical
house?
trial inspections. Yeah, in their house.
They're doing the study in their house?
I can't get into details.
In this era of tech, we're going back to Flintstones, man. We're
Yeah,
doing it.
I thought that was interesting.
I think it's
But yeah, so
interesting
there's a
too, man.
combination of both. But to Al's point, there will be more remote inspections. I think the FDA
Yeah.
loved it during COVID, and you're going to keep seeing more and more of it.
I actually think, this got me thinking, like we use Creo, eSource, eReg. I also am using Viva Site Vault for some studies, at least for the study startup process until we switch over to eSource. We give our monitors access to our Creo constantly, so they don't
Mhm.
need to like have monitoring visits.
Exactly.
They still do. They still do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we give them access and say, hey, if as long as you don't abuse it, like meaning querying us like on days you're not supposed to monitor, but just like for yourself, if it makes your job easier, like have at it. You can see our data in real time. I don't see why we can't. I mean, we wouldn't want to give the FDA access, but do you think the FDA at one point will just say, all the sites are going to be eSource, eReg? Hey, we'll just like be tapped into all the sites eSource,
I think
twenty-four
that's going to
seven.
be why. So the big discussion that's happening and I know people high up the food chain, right? And they're saying, why would the FDA even wait for the data? They'll just have a live feed into all the data as the
Exactly.
study's happening.
Yeah.
And then I don't want you to submit an application. I don't need an NDA. Once I know what the data is, I'll just approve it or deny it based on what's been done. We can have conversations, but it changes the engagement with the FDA. So your IND and your NDA is effectively, and I don't like saying it this way, but it's a bit of a marketing document in that you're putting forth your position on why your drug should be approved or why you should be allowed to do clinical trials. What happens if the FDA says, I don't need your exposition to this, I will have an AI do an analysis. So you give me the information, I'll have the AI run models for me and tell me if I like it, and I can come back to you with questions. So you move towards more meetings, less application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it. I think we're gonna get there. I mean, tech is supposed to remove friction between the origination of the data and the end result.
Yeah.
Patty says can't lie to the feds without it getting checked. Darshan probably knows better than most.
Actually, Patty has another great one, which is assumption is all data is ready to go, and it's not. She's 100% right.
Expand.
Scroll toward the bottom.
What does this mean from an attorney's perspective?
Well, so the idea is that and you know this better than I do, actually, but just because you put the data in doesn't mean that it's cleaned out. There are a bunch of queries, there are a bunch of clarifications. So it's just because the information's in doesn't mean it's ready to go. So to direct pipe it to the FDA, there's a reason. Maybe that's not the greatest idea in the world.
Right. Yeah, I have a
Then
simple example of this just on a tiny scale to show you guys the magnitude of where the issues can be with this. So with our eSource, we have ECGs for most studies, right? So anyone who's done an ECG knows you don't always get like a good reading the first time. Patient could be anxious, or the leads are misplaced, or like hair get in the way. There's all kind of stuff. So sometimes it takes like 20 minutes to get it right ECG reading. But in our e-source, we put the time patient lied down.
Right.
That's when the ECG start, right?
Yeah.
So yesterday I know because I answered a query. 8:26 a.m. ECG start
Yeah.
because that's when the patient lied down. So it makes sense. The coordinator's now away from the e-source and on the actual ECG. You don't have four hands. So the coordinator's now with the ECG, but she put correctly the time the ECG started. Well, by the time it's all, like a good reading, it's 9:03. It's like it took a long time. Probably a patient also needed to use the bathroom and got up, or who knows.
Yeah.
CRA queried it. ECG printout shows 9:03. Please clarify.
Right.
And I didn't do it, so I had to like go in there because I was looking at the query. I still get my hands dirty too. And I said, "Hey, what's going on here? Like what?" And they said, "No, these things take like time to do. It doesn't just happen like magic." I said, "Okay, I understand." So I replied to monitor, "Hey, I replied to query, correct as is, right? Correct as
Right.
is. It is correct." She replied back, "Well, please change the time to when the reading actually occurred." So this is exactly what Patty's talking about. Like our data was correct, but the way the CRA wanted it was also correct from the sponsor and a clean data perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just doing ECG. There's like nothing easier in research maybe than that. But so imagine all the complications like that are possible because of this data where we're
Do you want to pop
again,
Kelvin's thing?
yeah, but the theme is like pristine messy versus pristine. Tech is gonna make it messier.
Yeah.
I think that's the bottom line of this
Yeah.
topic and this
Yeah.
decade maybe. Uh, wow.
So Kelvin's thing
You
on
want to read
Chanel v.
this
Tom.
Kindle?
Yeah, the short the short version of this is the Chanel v. Tom's case from 2017. There was a decision about whether that's a delegable, whether informed consent is delegable. You can take off the thing so we can actually see. I can see your face. So here's the big issue. I actually was one of the first people to comment on Chanel v. Tom's. I got quoted in a bunch of newspapers and everything. The big takeaway was, yeah, we thought that it's a non-delegable duty. It actually got overruled. So I don't think it actually went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I believe it stopped. It got overruled by someone else, by the Court of Appeals. The second part of it is it was not done in a clinical trial sense. So people took the position that it is only applicable to healthcare, which I'm not sure I agree with that statement, but that was the position some people took. I do think that there will be a discussion continuing forward about whether informed consent must be performed by the physician or can it be done by someone else. The real question comes down to is the person able to answer the question? So do you want me to give you a quick update on what the situation in Chanel v. Tom's was?
Yeah.
So here's the situation. I think it was like a brain surgery. This is again 2017, so it's not like I read the case recently. But 2017, this patient was supposed to go in to do brain surgery, to have brain surgery done. The doctor sent a nurse in. The nurse got the informed consent, and the brain surgery, I guess, didn't go well. And the argument was, who should have done that informed consent? Should that have been the doctor and not the nurse? Which is very, very similar to what happens every single day in clinical trials. Mm-hmm. So the response basically was the initial court. I want to say the court. I want to say district court. I keep going to federal court, and I forget. I don't really remember how the Pennsylvania district court is named. I know that in New York, for example, the Supreme Court of New York is actually the lowest court. So I just don't know how Pennsylvania state courts work, because even though I live in Pennsylvania, I don't practice federal state law. Generally speaking, the informed consent was deemed to be so Patty's saying yes, clinical research, consent different, and areas of consent vary for both. Yeah, but from a legal standpoint, that's not going to hold up very strongly.
Yeah, Patty, if I learn anything about Darshan and all attorneys, it's like there's no answer to any yes or no. It's never that. right?
I like to think I give more concrete answers than that. At least here's the
Maybe
answer to the
you.
question you
Okay,
need and
sure.
it's risk.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
comes down to risk tolerance. But yeah.
but yeah, continue because I think people are like learning a lot from this actually.
Okay, glad to. Short version: the idea is, can a nurse in that specific situation take informed consent instead of a doctor? The district court said no. I think the Court of Appeal said yes, and that's where it kind of ended. I don't know if it went all the way to the Supreme Court or not, but that's the last. I didn't look at even the appeals. I remember hearing about, like, I remember responding to the initial decision, and then I had someone else who does healthcare law coming back with no, that got overruled. I was like, okay. So I haven't looked into it since then, but that was an important milestone. But that was going to change how it's going to be, how things will be engaged. So the physicians I've worked with in PA where I reside usually talk to the patient about the study. They go and see the coordinator to read the informed consent. Then the physician comes in, goes over it again. So I think that's the key piece, which is the physician goes in and talks again.
Yeah.
It has to be something where the patient has an opportunity to ask any
But is
questions
that
he or she has.
like in most states that's not like a requirement?
So, so that was a Pennsylvania thing,
Right.
but let's assume that it was still good law. The
Mhm.
question would be, who should be able to do that? So it's not a question of is it Pennsylvania or not,
Right.
because it's a court doctrine. Is that the standard of care? Is it expected? Should a patient, like, can you really get informed consent from someone who doesn't know? I mean, I respect the heck out of nurses, but they don't replace doctors.
Right.
So in the same way, or pharmacists, quite bluntly. So in the same way, should a patient be able to ask me a question about, say, a surgery? I'm not qualified to answer that question. So that's the same situation, right? So maybe
Right.
there is a situation where the surgeon is the only person who can do that job. Question is, what if it's not a surgeon? What if it's the PA who will be there in the surgery? Is that good enough? And the argument generally is maybe not. There's no clear answers to these, right? It's unless someone's really given a clear answer, you're making a best guess. But from a
Right.
risk perspective, I would say, you know what? I want the doctor to go in, ask if there are questions, answer questions, go from there.
Most people err on the side of caution, right? Like we have our
Exactly.
PI come in, at least the sub-I, but the PI come in for like almost every consent. And
Yeah.
just even if it's like 2 minutes, hey, thank you for considering the study. You know, this is
Yeah.
what all their clinics, they have good bedside manner. The good ones do.
Yeah.
Get yourself a
Yeah.
good one, guys and gals,
Yeah.
if you're going to start a site. Um, okay. I mean, thank you so much there, Sean. There's more questions, but I don't know how much time you got left. So maybe
Well, I
we'll
think we just should do another one, is all I'm thinking.
another podcast or
Yeah. I'll
yeah,
come back
let's do
again.
more.
Happy to do it.
All right, I'm happy to go on yours too. Like, give a plug to your show maybe, and then your
So
software you say you want to talk about, or you're not ready to go public yet.
we'll talk about it soon. I don't want to talk about the software yet
Okay.
until I'm ready. But I have a podcast called Darshan Talks, and all I do on it is I do law, regulations, and compliance in the life sciences. So I talk about everything from buying and selling pharma companies and food companies and FDA regulated companies in general to clinical research fraud. So I just did a whole presentation on types of misconduct, of research misconduct, and how the DOJ had in 2021 announced that they are prosecuting the heck out of clinical research. So you're seeing a huge uptick in clinical research fraud and prosecution in that space. So people are serving jail time. People are, I'm talking about owners, I'm talking about CRAs, I'm talking like everyone. Doctors are in funding, in the context of funding. You're seeing everything from
You can't leave us on this cliffhanger.
Perfect time to come back again, right?
What? Just give us a teaser. What's happening that you can talk about?
I mean, it's publicly available information. There are at least two separate situations where doctors and owners got prosecuted. You also have CRAs being prosecuted. You have
For fraud, making up data.
Well, some was making up data, some was not getting informed consent, a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I literally did a 2-hour presentation at Children's Hospital of Colorado on this, on just research fraud.
So on your pod, we can hear about fraud.
Yeah.
The fraud pod,
Peter,
guys.
Florida.
Darshan talks fraud. Florida. I think I'll be a third at Florida one more time. I think we're right on that one. That's easy money.
I'm gonna guess it's Florida as well. I don't really know. It's
Something
always
about
Florida.
Florida and just fraud in research is they go hand in
I
hand.
I love Florida,
All right, we love it too.
but
And sponsors love. Honestly, man, some of our best clients are in Florida
yeah,
for our research consulting. Like
yeah,
they get a bad rap. It's
they
toughest
do.
place to start a site,
Yeah.
toughest by far. But yeah, fraud pod. That's could be a good show, Darshan. Everyone, go follow Darshan Talks and Darshan's LinkedIn underneath. You go live too, right? LinkedIn live.
I do live as well. Yes,
Yeah, I see you on every now and then. I try to get in there and say
once a
something
week.
once a week. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Darshan. I appreciate it.
So,
Anything
look, I
else?
have a Florida story too.
Everyone does. I have Florida stories also.
I genuinely, I hope it's not Florida. I hope we're all wrong because that's not fair.
The one that caused a lot of controversy
Oh, not
2018 or something was in Washington State.
dude. There's so many. There's the Anwar case. There's this
That one,
other case.
Samir, right, or something. Samir, the guy
No,
who
no,
owned
no.
a site in Washington.
I
He's
don't know
doing
off the top
jail
of my
time now, but he got addicted to pain meds. And he started taking like the IP from the site, his own site, and like making up data to cover up his.
Yeah, yeah, that's the Anwar case. I
Dude,
don't know
did
about
you know I
Samir,
was
but
connected to him? At this time, I was accepting everyone's request. So somebody showed me this article and said, "You know this guy?" I was like, "No, why?" Well, he's your LinkedIn connect. I said, "Oh, I accept everyone." And I saw the story, man. It's unbelievable. And I actually knew a coordinator that worked for him.
yeah,
She got out of
it's
there,
Sami
luckily.
Anwar. Actually, I think you may be right. I think his name was Sami
Yeah,
Anwar.
Sammy Anwar. Yeah, I did a whole
Um,
video on him like 2 years ago or something.
yeah, it's a great story. So I talk about him as well in my presentation. It's
Wow.
it. You know what? Now I need to double check. Was this? I know Anwar was the last name. I want
It
to
was a
not
guy
make
in
up.
Washington that owned a site, and then he scaled. Talk about scaling again, right? He scaled, and he said the doctors didn't even know he was signing for them. Like, so the
Uh,
doctors didn't even get in trouble because he was like signing their papers.
I'm gonna do your people a big one. So I'm gonna present just as a teaser for the next time we do
Okay,
this.
this is an appetizer for Darshan. Everybody, I think Darshan has earned your follow. Go connect with him right now.
You ready?
He's an attorney that does not share legal advice. Interestingly enough, rich rich land business owner said, "Yes, this dude. Oh my god, man.
But yeah. So I thought
Yeah,
that might be worth sharing. And this is off the Department of Justice website.
DOJ. That's the one you don't want to mess with. FDA
You do
is like,
not mess with
okay.
the DOJ. You want to stop sharing? I don't know how to stop sharing
Oh yeah,
anything.
you're like in the matrix now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so thank you, Darshan. I really appreciate it. Go connect, guys, and thank you so much, Darshan. We got to do this more often. And
I'd love to. Once a
thank
month. I'm telling you, Dan, we're gonna do this once a month.
man, you're holding me to it. I think the sponsors will be happy. Inato, Creo, Versatrial, and Viva. Like you guys go check it out. And thank you guys for allowing me to work from home. Absolutely, we can do once a month.
Awesome. I'm looking forward
Like,
to it.
subscribe, comment, share. Go follow Darshan, guys, right now. Bye bye.